Welcome to Data BS, a show dedicated to tackling the big questions impacting the world of data and ML AI without any of the BS. My name is James Winegar. Each week I sit down with guests from across the data ecosystem to unpack how they're shaping their businesses or the businesses of others through the real-world application of data engineering, ML AI, infrastructure, analytics, and more. No fluff, unfiltered, but slightly edited to remove noise. This is Data BS. Let's get into it. Welcome to the Data BS podcast. We got Sam Arnold here with us. I think he knows a little bit more about himself than I do, so I'm going to hand it off to him to introduce himself.
Thanks, James. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me. A little bit about myself. So I'm an enterprise account executive at a data tech startup called Census, Series B, Sequoia, and Andreessen-backed, just about 100 employees at this point. But I digress. My background is that I've been a sales professional in a few different industries in tech, including MarTech and developer tools, and Census is my first foray into data. And I've had a lot of conversations at this point in the last year with companies big and small about everything they're going through with data. It's been a crash course, learned a lot, and happy to talk about some of this with you today.
You work at Census right now, and we work a lot with y'all on certain projects, and Census operates in a pretty competitive space in reverse ETL / customer data platform / et cetera. So how do you think that Census is differentiated from these other data activation platforms, and what parts really stand out to you?
Yeah, and maybe for folks who are listening who don't quite know what some of these concepts are, or what Census is, I can give a quick explanation. So like you mentioned, Census is in the data activation. We are a reverse ETL platform. Actually, my founder, Boris, and his co-founders really coined the term reverse ETL all the way back in 2018 when syncing data out from your warehouse into operational SaaS tools was a foreign concept. Nobody really did it. And from what I've heard, he was laughed at the time. But now fast forward to 2024, and it's a staple in the modern data tech stack. So what we do is the opposite. Some people might be familiar with Fivetran and other ETL tools that take data from various sources and get it into a data warehouse in a usable state. What we do is the opposite. We take data from the data warehouse and we sync it out to any of hundreds of different tools. So it's a little bit different because we have to both serve data teams who have pretty rigorous requirements around how to handle their models and govern data and observability on these data pipelines and so on. So that side's important. We serve data engineers and technical folks. But then because we are solving a couple of problems for them, not least of which is making data more self-service for their business teams. So we're talking marketing teams, finance, sales, you name it. There needs to be a good user-friendly front end so that once they have the data connected, they can hand the keys, if you will, to some of these business stakeholders, and they don't need to know SQL or any kind of technical concepts to be able to stand up a pipeline of data into their own tools. And so to your point, it is a very competitive space. There are a lot of tools out there that are trying to solve this problem in different ways. And how we are differentiating ourselves is we are getting away from a particular category that everybody else is cozied up close to, which is the CDP, right? Customer data platform. Everyone's calling themselves a customer data platform. I think it's lost its meaning. So we're looking to build bridges between data teams and the entire rest of the business, not just a marketing team, for example. And that's really where we're differentiating.
So just in my experience dealing with Census, we're mostly trying to enable product and marketing teams. Sometimes there's other use cases, but that's been our primary. So I have a customer right now where we're walking through some pretty complex segmentation use cases across multiple different entities, like users, events, booked meetings. There's about 4 or 5 different entities. And what the real goal is for us to provide them a tool, Census in this case, that give them the ability to, without calling a data engineer or our team or whatever, to say, okay, give me this like really funky segment so that I can do very targeted, like transactional type use cases, not even marketing use cases like that are actually really complicated in their platform just because across so many different entities. And so in enabling that, it's gonna allow product team to understand like these really niche like customers that exist because you're grouping across several different entities. And then also for the marketing team or the sales team or whatever, it's going to enable them to be very specific on targeting. They have pretty high average customer value, so it's worth it to them. It's really interesting to hear about computed fields. Like there's a lot of use cases for them for computed fields, but we're really trying to enable the non-technically savvy user. And so GPT or prompt-based like aggregations or seems really interesting. Is there any type of use cases you could talk to that like you've seen success with for the
Really common use case, like why are data use cases so big in marketing and sales? It's pretty obvious, right? It's because that's the straightest line between using data and making money, right? Whereas other things like helping the finance team move faster and helping an operations team handle tickets quicker and stuff, like all that's good. But usually the tip of the spear with adopting any new technology is often the marketing and sales team because they're trying to use whatever edge they can to stay ahead of competition, right? So with that in mind, like a couple of what we do is try to give the sales team, like myself, insights to use to help us know who to target with our outreach, who to go after. We have hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of potential companies out there that could all use our product, but who should I reach out to right now? And so there's a lot of fads, if you will, around signal-based marketing and sales and enriching from various sources and so on. So what we do is we have a lot of data that gets ingested and enriched in our own warehouse, and we will ingest, and some of that are signals like job postings, for example, for different companies. And we have calculations that run as well as a prompt that generates a couple of things for me and my coworkers, which we call a fit score. And what that does is it's a numeric score that is a attempt to put a number on how likely a given account is to get a lot of value out of Census, right? So things like what's their tech stack? Oh, they use Snowflake, they use Salesforce, they use these different apps that we integrate really well with. They get a lot of points for that. Do they have any open roles for data engineering? Do they have a lot of employees that work there with data in the title? There's a whole list of different criteria, but I don't really have to think about that. When I'm going in and doing my job, I just can sort a bunch of accounts and just see and sort of select who is going to be a really good fit. So that's really helpful. And a lot of companies are interested in that use case because with the changing economics and the macro environment being what it is, the bar for sales productivity is really high. And very few companies out there really hitting it. So they're spending a lot of money on salespeople that are just not productive. And so they're looking for anything they can take advantage of to move the needle.
So in terms of the utilization of AI tools, I'm super bullish on like the efficiency gains for people. Like I'm not bullish on artificial general intelligence or whatever, AGI, but I'm super bullish on how do we make Sam and James like 2 to 5 times more effective with their time because they're not spending as much time on like wording details, but instead like what's the message I'm trying to send and why I'm trying to send it. So really think that like in terms of our team, like summarization has been a major time savings, like for our project managers and things like that. Just take some notes in Google Docs, use Gemini or ChatGPT to summarize it, generate action items, and then just do a quick review to make sure, hey, like it missed one action item because it was locked into some other stuff. Okay, cool. So what used to take like 30 minutes now takes 3 or 4 minutes for somebody.
Even better. Yeah, for me, I use tools every day. My favorite right now is Claude. I love Claude, Anthropic's GPT tool. And I do use ChatGPT as well. I even use Grok sometimes, which is cool. But the benefits are huge. And it stuns me that not everybody takes advantage of this. I was on a call yesterday, and I was preparing for this meeting with a very technical company that sells like biotech stuff that I cannot even begin to fathom. I dropped Bio 101 in college a million years ago. I like biology. I'll read pop science books about it. But when you start talking about like the stuff that's actually commercialized out there, no idea. And their website did not help at all when I was trying to research. So like, what I did, and it took me all of 10 minutes, right? I just took information like that I found, copied and pasted from their site, copied and pasted from their earnings call transcript, which I love doing, and then just gave it to Claude and then just asked a series of questions. And within about 10 minutes, I fully understood what they sell, who they sell to, what's going well there, what's not going well there. I summarized this stuff into a slide that I showed at the very beginning of the conversation with this group. And they were very impressed. They were
Yeah.
like, wow, no other sales rep we've spoken with has outlined clearly what we do in the business context for this discussion. And they were like, did you use some kind of ChatGPT for this? And I said, it's my little secret. But of course I did. I did. And you're right, because it takes, I mean, it's like in college. I did philosophy in college, and all of the work that you're doing is reading large volumes of text, trying to understand it, and then giving a summary and a perspective about it. And it's just such a huge consumption of mental resources. And we're able to make that so much better.
I think like we become selective about our information consumption. When I think about like AI tooling and things like that, I really think like the user experience is the key. Like how do you get Sam to be effective in the utilization of the tool? And that's really what like ChatGPT, when it first came out with, that was like the secret sauce. It was good enough that anybody could use it and understand what was happening, and it gave good enough results that it had utility. Because before, like all the stuff has to exist, but it wasn't good enough to like give you good results and have that like user experience that like everybody's like, oh yeah, I can use this. I think like another interesting thing is like when me and you have worked together on a few different projects or deals or whatever, and like the outline of like hey, why do you care about talking to me? Like is something, I deal with a lot of salespeople trying to hit me up all the time too, right? And I'm a sales guy practically by trade because I'm running the company, and talking to like the business, like what does the business actually care about and what's the use case, and like not just like, hey, you need my tool, here's why you need my tool. It really sets the ground for, okay, we're establishing a relationship built on trust that I understand what you're looking for or might potentially need, and that I have that understanding. So we're on common ground, and that now we're going to have this discussion about like why I think in your case Census makes sense for y'all to use.
I think in the context of data, what's interesting is we're taking a lot of the hard work off the table. And there's even other companies, like for example, I talked to one of the executive directors at the City Hall of New York City, here where I'm based, and this morning, and we talked about Census a little bit, and that was cool. But I also told him about a startup that a friend of mine made, which is a different use case of the same technology. It's called Hamlet. It's a really cool tech company here. He just spun up, and it's getting a lot of traction. And what they're doing is they are ingesting large amounts of public data for local cities, right? So things like city council meetings, the minutes, the videos, different stats, and so on, things that are happening in the town. And they are producing high quality summaries of these for their citizens, right? So if you live in, I think Saratoga is one of the ones that have adopted this, then you can go on a portal now and you can get you can like within minutes see everything that is going on in the city. What are they approving? What are they talking about? What are they debating? And it's a way of furthering civic engagement. It's like such a huge task to go wade through these data, and it really prohibits people from having any kind of influence at all. But now with this technology, these cities are able to open it up. And we'll see if New York ends up going that way. He was very interested in this, where you don't need to be a well-read person with a bunch of time on your hands to understand what's important and then to decide if and when to get involved. So I thought that was a really cool use case as well.
It's crazy interesting to me because like the local government is the government that people are least engaged with. And it's probably the most important in their actual day-to-day lives in terms of like what's going on with my school systems. Me and you both have young kids, right? And so we care about they're going to get a good education and it's safe and all that other stuff. What's going on with like the business in the area, chamber of commerce type meetings and things like that. I don't have time to go to every chamber of commerce meeting in my like suburb area. So being able to get just like, hey, here's the meeting minutes summarized, which is basically what our project manager is doing for all of our meetings, is saying, here's like the 1 minute bites that you need to consume about like what happened and why it happened, right? And so that's super interesting. I hope that takes off and he gets a lot of cities signed up for that.
It's going to get even more intense, I'm sure, right? Like there's this concept also emerging. I think Apple might even be promoting this of like local AI agents that will be running on our own local hardware, like your own phone, and it will have access to your own little private ecosystem of data, right? Like what are you buying? How are you spending your time? What restaurants are you going to? What movies you bought? All of the think about everything that's like in just your Gmail inbox, for example, how much you could learn about that. And so I think what we're going to end up with is a situation where we're going to all have our own AI agents. They're going to know us even better than we know ourselves. And we're going to be able to ask questions like that. Like, I want to move somewhere. Where should I go? Right. And it's going to know, it's going to say, you're for sure going to be way happier living in Boston. Or you should think about the benefits of living in Zimbabwe, right? Like stuff that you maybe not even thought about. And I think it's going to it's going to be interesting.
It's like the internet coming in, right? Like I think you're old enough and internet existed suddenly and then like nobody knew what to do with it. I think the Gen AI use cases in particular, like opening up that just because the ability for every person to interact with it, not just, hey, the thing that was running on Google to give you better search results. Like that was most people's interactions with AI until a couple of years ago. Now it's like they are actively like probing that system. I do just want to remind you that the podcast is called Data BS, so we're allowed to deviate a little bit. I'm sure Census would really love us to stay on topics, but I think more than happy to keep exploring. If we look back at history, humanity's always come out on the other side, typically in a better place. Industrial Revolution, a lot of people had big problems back then because really changed the dynamic, centralized a lot of power, and I don't remember the word off the top of my head, but oligarchs basically, and there was a bunch of political turmoil during that time. But if you ask yourselves, what's the quality of life pre-industrial revolution to 30 years after the industrial revolution started? Night and day, right? Airplanes, like the ability to travel across the world in less than a day. Right? Like, what did that enable? It enabled globalization to even be reasonably possible, right? Because, information sharing was key to being able to do globalization. People have been trying to, the Silk Road and things like that, people have been trying to do that for thousands of years, but just the technology, traveling 3,000 miles in a wagon through mountains and deserts and things like that is very painful. And now we have our logistics system with gigantic boats, barges, etc., and an airplane. We can really see the evolution and how that's impacted our overall quality of life, medical advancements, polio, and all those types of things. My grandparents were scared of polio. Like, we don't even talk about it anymore because like it's basically non-existent in the US, existence in like Africa and some places, but there's people working on that as well. Tuberculosis, pretty similar. So medical advancements, and then internet comes along, personal computers, mobile phones. Now we're in this like AI craze. And I think that like AI, like there's hype cycle around it, but there's also just like truly use cases that were impossible prior.
I think the hype is overhyped. I know a lot of people, like there was articles that came out recently, like from Goldman, being like, it's like, when are we going to see the money, right? And of course, it's going to be their perspective until the money comes in. But I don't think that people get it. Like, I think the people that are poo-pooing AI and saying it's just a fad, I think they're going to feel pretty silly in a few years, because I think the potential is even bigger than what we can currently fathom. I don't think it's smaller. I also think that you're right in that what's going to happen with a lot of these applications of AI is that the work of even coming up with ideas for how to use it will start to be used by AI. And once we hit this point where there's this sort of self-reinforcing virtuous cycle of AI development. And also another thing that's going to be happening is that a lot of things that are, I was just talking to somebody else in the manufacturing industry about this. Manufacturing has not really advanced too much in recent years. I remember when I was in college, actually, I spent an internship at a Goodyear tire factory. And on the one side of the factory was like the brand new shiny machines. The other side of the factory was all the stuff that's been there since like the 40s. And it wasn't really that different. Like the new stuff was slicker, it was white instead of like dirty green, but like it was been doing the same basic stuff, just slightly better. Like there's not really been like a leap forward. And I think what's going to happen is that a lot of things that require physical material to develop is going to become more virtual. You use the medicine example. They're using AI now to to basically simulate and generate what different kinds of molecules can do, right? Which is a big part of medicine. It's coming up with a molecule, trying to predict what it does based on the shape of it and the properties of it. And within minutes, they can generate millions of these things now and figure out with AI which ones are likely to have what effects. And then they can take that and run with it. And I think we're going to see the same thing in the physical space in all kinds of places. Like, what's the best way to build a house? Is it really pulling up with a truck full of lumber and the way that we're doing it now? I think a lot of these things are going to be simulated. They're going to be done just like we're simulating molecules. We're going to simulate all kinds of things in the virtual world before to prove it out, before then we take it into the physical world to actually do it. And that's not really happening too much yet, maybe a little bit, but I think it's going to explode.
When you're talking about manufacturing, drug discovery type use cases with like medicine, a lot of that's like, how do we reduce the prototyping time, right? Like prototyping is the most expensive part of most like endeavors in terms of R&D and things like that.
That's the big part why drugs are so expensive, right? They spend billions of dollars to develop a drug and they need to recoup those costs, right? If you can reduce that, we're in a much better state.
Yeah, exactly. And so I have a few different thoughts here, and then I want to bring it back to the more like, let's talk about like you and like sales team, and then we'll close it out. So on the manufacturing side, like what I was thinking about is like reinforcement learning, right? And this concept of a digital twin. So you create this digital simulation environment, which is basically equivalent of a physical space, what you were talking about. And then we got reinforcement learning. When we think about like these large language models and how well they are given the amount of information, or how good they are given the amount of information they've consumed. There's a person, I don't remember how to say his name correctly, at Facebook. He's like the director of AI at Facebook. He has this thing about like the amount of information that these LLMs have consumed, like is tens of thousands of years of consumption, but the like intellectual level is roughly equivalent to a 4-year-old. And we can do things to make it better. I think he believes that way of approaching generative AI through LLMs is not the end all be all. He thinks there's other more effective ways we'll find in the future. But it's interesting to compare intelligence levels based off the amount of information consumed. So how do people operate within like the learning cycle relative to how machine learning operates? So reinforcement learning is just like do a thing, update your information, you play Mario Brothers or something like that. And when you do that, it takes a really long time for these AI algorithms to like be able to beat Mario. And so I think that like there's something to be said there too about just like our overall, like we're not even close to human level ability to learn. All we're doing is throwing tens of thousands of years of equivalent time at them. So I just thought it's an interesting idea to think about.
At the end of the day, our intelligence developed over however many millions of years.
Yeah,
some say a lot. Yeah, some say a lot more quickly too. So we get to the point where we can simulate the evolution of a fruit fly brain, and we can speed that up through compute to where it can run about 1 billion years in an afternoon. Who knows what we turn out with, right?
So one of the things I was thinking about bringing it back to business and really your profession in sales is that there's a high skew in sales reps. Like there's really, at a given company, there's a few people really bringing it home, and then most of the people aren't making their number for the most part. And when I think about like a sales profession, or really just like where you have to execute at a high level, the utilization of these tools is the difference between making it and not making it. And so I believe that for most people, we're seeing a 30% to 500% increase in productivity by leveraging these tools, just more based on like their role. I think sales is very much outsized in terms of the productivity gain, because it's about your information consumption, right? Before, like 5 years ago, you're reading 10Ks, you're looking at job descriptions, you're basically trying to like bring all this information in, but maybe you read the job description, you read your job title, but not the description. And when you read the description, it's really not what the job title is. So we summarized all this information ourselves historically. You spent 20, 30 minutes on it, but then it wasn't as effective. And then that impacts your ability to have like a really powerful conversation with, you know, the stakeholder that you're talking with. And now, like we talked about earlier, 15 minutes, you've really digested the business, even if it's complex, and understand what they're doing, why they're doing it, how they're doing it, what the problems they're facing are, etc. And then that's leading to the ability really to establish a relationship, because you understand what's going on. And then by proxy is the ability to close a deal, or to say, hey, this doesn't make as much sense, and divert your time to where it does make sense. And so I think that these efficiency gains are really powerful within like the sales rep environment.
Yeah, I would agree. And a lot of sales is about, it's like gambling, right? You don't have chips, you have time. And so your ability to be effective as a salesperson is directly, linearly correlated with your ability to place good bets on your time. So who should I be reaching out to? What should I say? How should I do it? Who, like, let's say I have 200 different accounts I could reach out to. I only have however much time in a day. Like, who's going to get my time today? Of the deals that I'm working, who's going to get my time? Right. And I think that the best salespeople are always the ones who are the best users of their time. So what we're able to do with these AI tools, and bringing it back to what we were talking about at the beginning, is putting insights into the hands of sales reps. And that means that some of your sales reps who may not be that good, frankly, right, at going out, researching, understanding, maybe they don't have very good business acumen or whatever, you really can't scale a sales team of pure A players for very long, right? You just can't. Like, you can hire A player only sales team for maybe like your first 10 hires, maybe if you're lucky. At a certain point, you've got to be able to have a good, profitable, growing business with B players, and maybe eventually C players, right? I think AI tools are going to allow C and B players to do the kinds of things that A players have been doing for decades. So that's how I see it. I agree. And another thing, to bring it back to the business data thing, is that data scientists and these teams, people like yourself, you're spending a lot of time on producing these valuable insights in whatever ways, right? At the most basic level, maybe people are listening to this and they're like, oh, this is too fancy, this is too complex, I can't do any of this. At the most basic level, like, you could just take the data you have and produce very simple metrics that are still extremely useful, right? Good, bad. Is this a good customer, bad customer, right? Are they likely to spend more? Are they likely to churn? And a lot of these things are out of the box, and you can find models to help you work through things like lifetime value and whatever else. But then you have to do something with it, right? It's not enough to produce the insight. You have to actually put it into action. And so there are tools out there. That's a big bottleneck that I work at with people. You have data scientists who will come in from the Harvard, MIT data science program, and they're doing really cool, fancy things. But then people aren't really using it, right? They're not really getting into the hands of the people like the sales team, the marketing team, whoever, and actually getting value out of it. And so they end up spending inordinate amounts of time doing that. That's what Census does. That's what a lot of people are spending time on, is going not just from, hey, producing the cool, shiny, interesting thing, but actually producing results with it. That's what I spend a lot of my time talking about with companies. I think we're just at the surface, scratching the surface here of how far we're going to take this. But every executive out there is paying attention to it. And yeah, I think it's producing big results. I think sales, you're right. Sales is a beginning. Marketing is a beginning. Eventually, it's going to show up everywhere.
Yeah, I think that, you know, there's a lot of opportunity in the space to continue to grow like our approaches, right? Like, one of the things that happens in a lot of sales orgs is you have, you know, your BDR, your SDR, and then your actual account exec. Like, it's the same idea. You're pushing down B and C, who can like just generate a meeting versus who can like figure out like whether this makes sense versus like actually trying to establish, is there a need, is there a way that like we can make this work, right? And one of the things that the VCs are pitching is this idea of like inverting the org chart a little bit, so you don't need as many like SDR BDR type folks. Instead, you can, with the utilization of these tools, like get your own SDR, BDR. Some of that's really annoying because it's like robocall type of stuff. And so people are really turned off by that. So there's still a human element to a lot of the approaches that we need to take to everything. So
there's always good and bad ways to use and abuse technology, right? You see it everywhere. Like when email automation tools came out, what happened? People just loaded up the spam cannon and just started blasting people with drip sequences. I remember 10 years ago, I would get like 5 emails a day that'd be like, you haven't responded. Were you being eaten by an alligator? Like, you get the same dumb emails that nobody personalized or cared about. But then some people used it really well, really effectively. And AI is the same way. You have some people who are spamming LinkedIn right now with the worst comments ever, just a complete waste of time. You have people selling ebooks within like 5 seconds. You can tell they just generated it. There's people abusing this stuff. There always is. But then there's people that are using it really intelligently. And I tell my BDR, I have a BDR I work with, and I'm working with her on using Claude effectively. And I told her, and I'm serious about this, I'm like, for us to stay employed in the long term, we must take advantage of these tools. We must learn them, become experts at them, because the folks that are ignoring them, the folks that 5 years from now are still trying to figure it out, they're going to get left behind.
that's a good point to close off on. So where can people learn more about you, Sam, and about Census?
Sure. Again, I'm Sam Arnold. You can find me on LinkedIn. Please feel free to add me. You can find Census at getcensus.com. You can sign up for a trial if you're curious. We have a pretty generous perpetual free plan. Of course, you can get in touch with me too if you want to see some of the fancier stuff, you want a demo. And that's me.
Thanks for joining us, Sam. Hope you have a great weekend.
Thanks, James.
That's it for this episode of Data BS. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast and not miss the next one. This episode was sponsored by CorrDyn, a data consultancy that helps organizations unlock the power of their data. If you have a data challenge, we can help. Visit CorrDyn.com, CorrDyn.com, to learn more. See you next time.